Welcome in, everyone, to a new episode of the Bat Flip Podcast. My name is Damien here with David this week. Missing Matt had to do it on a different day this week, so not able to get him in. But we're just going to do a short Hall of Fame talk-only episode. We had the Hall of Fame vote was announced yesterday as we're recording this. So we're going to give you what our ballots would have been had we been able to record beforehand, and then look forward to what the actual vote looked like, and then look forward to the 2024 ballot and give a little discussion on that. But before we jump into everything, David, how are you doing this week?
I'm doing good. It's snowing here in Chicago, so just taking it easy today. Worked from home, so it was nice, and we'll be ready to get spring coming around the corner here. I know we're getting kind of close, but at least now we can think about the Hall of Fame and think about kind of historical baseball for an afternoon. But before we get started, how are you doing, Damien?
I'm doing all right. Had one of my best friends from high school got married this week, so was a little hectic throughout the weekend and the last couple days with that whole situation going on. But glad to be back and talking about some Hall of Fame voting and how ridiculously dumb some of these voters are, or most of these voters are. But yeah, overall it's been good, and let's go ahead and start this.
Sounds good. So Scott Rowland gets elected to the Hall of Fame, and he is the only one from the 2023 ballot getting elected. But Fred McGriff was elected by the Players Committee, which included Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, and a bunch of the guys that were on the ballot last year. So McGriff was the only one to get elected from that committee, and then Scott Rowland gets elected by the writers on this ballot. We haven't really discussed it, but there felt like kind of an opening here for some guys to get elected that maybe weren't as expected before, when you had Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, Curt Schilling kind of clogging up the talk of the ballot. And this year it was all about Rowland, Todd Helton, Jeff Kent, and Andrew Jones really were the primary four, I think, that were kind of on everybody's mind. Oh, and I guess Billy Wagner too, to see who would make the Hall of Fame. And there for a while, it looked like Todd Helton was trending to get in, but ultimately he falls short, and Scott Rowland gets into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, it's been really weird, this whole voting process. And even Carlos Beltran with his first year on the ballot, there was probably a strong case before the whole Houston Astros sign stealing scandal. You could make the case for first ballot Hall of Fame for Beltran, but with that character issue, in voters' minds recently, it seemed to hurt his vote there. But like you mentioned with Kent, Andrew Jones, Wagner, Helton, Rowland, you really felt like there was probably a handful of guys that had a good chance to get in this year. Rowland did hit the mark at the 76.3 mark. Helton just barely missed it. He's at 72%. You have to hit 75. I would assume he probably is able to pick up the votes next year, but with a crowded ballot next year, it'll be interesting to see how that affects some of these votes. But, it's just head scratching. A guy like Jeff Kent, at 46.5% of the votes on the final year on the ballot, isn't able to get enough votes. I mean, I think he was trending in the right direction the past couple of years, and we thought, especially with the handful of names kind of falling off the ballot from last year, either by less percentage of votes or yearing out on the ballot, there seemed to be a strong case for Kent to be able to get in. That's not the case, and he'll have to wait for that. I think it was the Modern Era Committee.
Yep.
In 2025, I believe is when he's going to be eligible for that. Is what I saw. So overall, I'm happy Rowland got in. He's one of the ones that we would have had. David and I have pretty much identical ballots about who we thought should have got in here, but head scratching to see some of these names and the vote totals they got, but happy to see Rowland get in, and through the writers, and then with McGriff through the Modern Era Committee. He's a name that's been a hot commodity for a couple years now anyways. So it's pretty good to see him get in.
Let's jump into Scott Rowland a little bit, since he is the elected Hall of Fame member. And Scott Rowland ends up with I was pulling up his baseball reference so I could get his number. He was a 7-time All-Star, 8-time Gold Glove winner, a member of the 2006 World Series winning St. Louis Cardinals team. He also went to the World Series in 2004, where the Cardinals lost to the Red Sox. Now, his best season was that 2004 season where he put up 9 wins above replacement. And that 2004 season was super impressive because that was a team featuring Albert Pujols, who I believe won MVP that year, featuring Jim Edmonds and among other, really talented Cardinals players that were just an absolute thorn in the side of the Cubs. Scott Rowland had the most WAR of any of them that season. He was just as dominant as Pujols and Edmonds, and instrumental in leading the Cardinals to the World Series that year. Ultimately, they go down to the kind of the team of destiny, the Red Sox. But Rowland had a 34 home run season as a third base, the best defensive third baseman in baseball, and 8 Gold Gloves. That doesn't tell the whole story, but every time you watch him play third base, and he was the type of guy who just is a vacuum cleaner out there. He made every play. He kind of reminds me of Nolan Arenado now in terms of defensive reputation. That was just the case from when he came into the league until he retired as a Cincinnati Red in like 2012.
Yeah, and for all the people that the WAR number signifies Hall of Fame or close to Hall of Fame number, he's at just about 70 career WAR. And if you look through his entire career, there's only five seasons that he played over 150 games. Like, he has multiple seasons in here where under 100 or just above that 100 game mark. His counting stats could have been so much higher than what he was able to show already. And being that best defensive third baseman throughout that time, winning the 8 Gold Gloves, having the impact that he was able to have, and being elite defensively pretty much through the entire end of his career. Usually you see those people fall off towards the end. I know his last season, it was a little bit of a drop off there, but that's at the age 37. I mean, other than that, he's still in his second to last year at 36, had a 6.3 defensive value per Fangraphs. It's just very, very impressive. He's a guy who should have got in a lot earlier, but it's, glad that at the end of the day, he was able to make that jump. And I believe I saw something that said from the first year they got onto the ballot to the last year, he's the one that's made the biggest jump into getting into the Hall of Fame. I believe he debuted at only 10%, or like 10.2 on his first year on the ballot. So was this year 9 for Rowland, or is this 10?
Oh man, I think it was 10.
Was it 10? Well, you were
20. No, 20. No, it's year 5, right? Because 2012,
it was only year 5.
2006,
okay.
2017. So
so he wasn't. It's
he
10
shot
years
up
since he retired. That's what
right,
it was.
right. And I've seen a lot of Scott Rowland didn't remind me of a Hall of Famer when he played, and I push back on that wholeheartedly. Right? I mean, I it's funny because watching that 2004 Cardinals team obliterate my 2004 Cubs team, I had just an obvious sense that it was like watching 3 Hall of Famers play, right? It was Pujols, Edmonds, Rowland. Jim Edmonds got 5%ed off of the ballot, and it took Rowland, 5 years to get in, and now there's question that Rowland was even deserving to begin with. And I'm just, it's always knowing that Scott Rowland was like this guy you could just pencil in as the Gold Glove winner at third base. He's the kind of guy that was so reliable for so long, and even though he did stumble into injuries, he was still able to put up successful seasons late into his career, like in 2011 with the Reds, where he hit, or 2010 with the Reds, where he hit 20 home runs as a 35-year-old. And he had a career slash line of 281, 364, 490, which was good enough for a 122 WRC plus. But remember, he played from 1996 through 2004, where his WRC plus was reduced, but this is not a guy who was under any sort of steroid accusation, playing in the era with a ton of those, Barry Bonds and Sammy Sosa and all those guys who do have those steroid accusations. Having done this cleanly and with the defensive reputation that Rowland has, I'm floored that we don't think of him as an obvious Hall of Famer, and obviously he wasn't even, he was often overlooked by Chipper Jones, who was an, first ballot Hall of Famer, and some of those guys. He and Chipper played almost the exact same number of years and had and Roland was a better defender than Chipper the whole time.
Yeah, the one argument that I always hate about or around MLB Hall of Fame voting time is, are we talking about the Hall of Fame or are we talking about the Hall of Very Good? That argument pisses me off more than anything, because the guidelines or for lack of better terms, what I'm trying to look for what a Hall of Fame player looks like is so much different between what player, what position, and everything. Like we're talking about Fred McGriff here, who everyone, if you listen to it, everyone's saying Fred McGriff should have no doubt been a Hall of Famer, right? No doubt should have been in the Hall of Fame through the committee, and he had to get through the modern era ballot. And everyone uses WAR so much. He's a 56% WAR or 57% WAR guy, close to 500 homers with 134 WRC plus. And then you get, that's sure, it's a really good Hall of Fame candidacy. And then you go to a guy like Kent. I know I'm rolling on about the Kent thing, but with in his career 56% WAR or 56 WAR there with 377 homers, but as a second baseman, those numbers are very, very equal if you would consider that to a first baseman, same level of category, right? We jump to Roland, 70% WAR, still has over 300 homers, and then you factor in the 8 years of Gold Glove defense. Scott Rolen was a very good player, but he's also a Hall of Fame caliber player. Yeah. It's the reason why he battled the injuries, but he still had longevity. He still played 17 years in the major leagues. The longevity aspect's what hurts a guy like Andrew Jones, but Andrew Jones has all the Gold Gloves and stuff to back it up as well. But Roland had the ability to, even though he had injuries, played many years at a high level defensively and was still pretty good offensively to warrant this, this Hall of Fame induction. The whole Hall of Good thing, like what people say with Todd Helton, it very much irritates me.
Yep.
Every single year we come up about this because MLB Hall of Fame voting is the most strict Hall of Fame voting out of all of the major sports here. And everyone has to say this small ballot or anonymous blank ballots all the time, where you have a ballot here that has I'm not say well over, but has at least 10 Hall of Famers that should be, or that are on this ballot. And probably you can make a case 15 of these guys on this ballot should be Hall of Famers. And you have some people getting 5% it off, other people getting 10% of the vote who should be in, and I understand not everyone can make it on the first year on the ballot, but this ballot's just going to keep getting more stacked and stacked as we're coming up on it. And we'll talk about the 2024 ballot here in just a little bit and why that is. But the Hall of Very Good argument just irritates me. And I know I've rambled on about that.
No worries. I think you look at who went off of this list, right? And some of the people who are still on but probably don't have a chance to make it, like Torrey Hunter, who's got 6.9% of the vote, who's probably not going to make it next year. Torrey Hunter is the type of guy who is probably like a Hall of Very Good guy, right? And then you look at some of these other guys that end up off the list, right? R.A. Dickey, Matt King, Jacoby Ellsbury, your boy Andre Ethier, right? Jared Weaver, Jason Worth. Those are guys that we're going to look back on, or like even Mike Napoli, who's a coach with the Cubs right now. Like Mike Napoli at first base, you're like, oh yeah, I remember watching Mike Napoli play, but Mike Napoli was not a Hall of Famer, right? He's a Hall of Very Good guy. Those are good players. They all deserve, their glance, their look, but you're not letting those guys into the Hall of Fame. We're not talking about, guys who played really good for 4 years and had 4 decent years after that, and that was it, right? We're talking about guys who played for 17 years, who were, won 8 Gold Gloves, who hit 300 home runs, who hit 500 home runs. In Jeff Kent's case, set the record for most home runs hit by a second baseman, right? Andrew Jones set the record for most defensive WAR by a center fielder, right? Like you've got these guys who have these superlatives that are so much greater, even without and this is specifically without the steroid and negative connotations that some of these other guys have. You've got Bobby Abreu, who's got like a 400 career on base percentage, and you're letting guys in like Vladimir Guerrero, who had a lesser on base percentage and lesser, overall numbers and lesser overall WAR, but because Vlad is very popular, he gets in. But Bobby Abreu is basically dead in the water at this point in terms of a Hall of Fame case. You're right. It's very frustrating because the guys who are not going to get in, and I'm looking ahead towards the next ballot, right? We're looking at some guys that are very familiar, probably with our viewers. You're looking at like David Wright, Matt Holliday, Bartolo Colon, Adrian Gonzalez, Jose Bautista. These guys are all probably not going to get into the Hall of Fame, but those are all Hall of very good guys that are, if they did get into the Hall of Fame, I certainly wouldn't be upset.
No,
I wouldn't argue for it necessarily, but I wouldn't be upset about it because those are guys that I'd love to honor. But those are guys that are Hall of very good. You're talking about Todd Helton, who was MVP candidate going against Barry Bonds and Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire in the 90s and early 2000s, who was hitting like 350 at Coors. And you could say, yeah, sure, Coors, but he also had like a 160 WRC plus that time in a steroid era. In the steroid era in Coors, he was getting 60% above league average. Like, Todd Helton is a surefire Hall of Famer in my mind. But you're seeing this Hall of very good stuff, and it's not equivalent.
Well, yeah, and here's the thing that I saw on a Todd Helton one, and we'll let this wrap up the roll, and we'll jump to McGriff here after this. But Todd Helton hit 287 with an 855 OPS away from Coors Field.
Yep,
and still has the adjusted 132 WRC plus.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Coors Field, that is also another one,
and that's his career numbers too. Helton was not as good after his prime,
right? And I hate the whole Coors Field argument as well, as well as the DH. Like all of these arguments. First of all, why are we penalizing somebody for their home field when it's a home field that's in the major leagues? Like it doesn't matter if he played in Coors Field; he had to play there. That's the team he was on. Like stop. Hurt or what's the word I'm looking for? Stop using that against
penalizing.
him. Yeah. Stop using that against him because of that. Who cares if somebody was a DH? That's a position that we have in the game. If they're the best DH, or if they're a guy who is very well, exceeds what it should be at a DH level numbers, who cares? It's a position we have in it.
Yeah,
like those arguments, they
bother me.
The Hall of Fame, it bothers me. Anyways, looking at Fred McGriff, we're looking at a guy who played 19 years, had 493 career homers, had what I said before, 56.9, pretty much 57% WAR. Or I keep saying percent.
I don't
57. I don't know why either. Because percentage of votes here. And whatever.
It's
ended with about 57 career WAR. Played for a lot of different teams, had the longevity. And you brought up a good point. He didn't make it in on the writers' ballot, but he made it through the modern era. Had he had 7 more homers in his career, had that 2004 year where at age of 40 he played 27 games and only hit 2 homers. Had he been able to play a little bit, get those 7 homers, and been at 500 homers for his career, probably would have made it in through the writers' committee.
Well, you got to remember, 1994 was Fred McGriff's age 30 season. 1994 ended prematurely on a strike.
Yeah, that is right. Yeah,
Fred McGriff was at 34 homers at the time of the strike at 113 games. He absolutely would have hit 7 more home runs had they not gone on strike there. Had that been resolved in some other way. So penalizing Fred McGriff for the 1994 season is wildly outrageous to me, and I think he would have been elected had there been fewer crazy cases on the ballot when he was fighting his case, where he his time overlapped with Barry Bonds and Sammy Sosa and some of those guys. Had he not had to face those guys, if Fred McGriff was on the ballot this year, I think he would have been in easily. But because his case was obscured by guys with more home runs and with you're looking at Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire and Barry Bonds and it's tough to reason Fred McGriff because he was definitely less good, but he was also clean, and they care about that. I will go over my ballot here in a second. I don't really care about that because it's baseball. If you're not pushing the rules, you're not trying. But to be suspended for steroids maybe could be considered one thing, but Fred McGriff doesn't even have accusations, and he hit 500 home runs in the steroid era. Like, I'm really glad that this has been kind of corrected, and I hope that future guys who were really good in the past couple of decades there, like Dave Stieb and others, like Kenny Lofton, like Jim Edmonds, are able to kind of take this path to get in, because this committee has been doing a good job of rectifying mistakes made by the Writers' Committee. We've seen Tim Raines get in via this. I think Lou Whitaker did get in from this. So it's really nice to get this rectified. And now I hope they, can go in and get more of the obvious Hall of Fame candidates elected to the Hall of Fame, that we know deserve to be there. And it looks like some of these guys, like Jeff Kent, are going to have to go this way as well.
Your Hall of Fame voting is broken when you have to make a secondary committee of mostly players to have a second vote for people who didn't make it through the writer's ballot to potentially get into the Hall of Fame.
Absolutely. You got guys voting with blank ballots on this ballot, which was absolutely a ballot, deserving of multiple votes. You've got guys voting like Francisco Rodriguez only, which, look, I like Francisco Rodriguez. He's not even the best relief pitcher on this ballot.
No.
So he's got more saves than Billy Wagner, but Billy Wagner's a better relief pitcher. Like, it's just frustrating to see these guys. They all vote with, not all of them, right? But a good chunk of them vote with ego in mind. And they're the ones in power. And it's that's not the point here. The point is you need to choose the best players to represent baseball in Cooperstown. And they very rarely take that into consideration. So,
and not just that, but you have people who use, like for Billy Wagner's case, they use his 10 innings in the postseason where he has like a 10 ERA to break his whole argument of a guy who in 903 career regular season has a 231 ERA and a 273 FIP and has a, 422 saves. Like the whole 10 innings in the postseason argument that has a 10 ERA, like that's why you're not voting for a guy like Billy Wagner. Who the hell cares, dude? Anyways.
It's funny because the postseason results are so fluky for relief pitchers, especially. Yeah. It's based purely in 2 bad postseasons for Billy Wagner.
Yeah.
Or I guess 3 bad postseason appearances for Billy Wagner. He's got other postseason appearances where he was locked down.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make any sense. And he even had 3 saves in the 2006 run for the Mets where they lost to the Cardinals again. But it's just frustrating that Billy Wagner is one of the best closers, that I knew growing up, and he pitched for a long time. He's got a really good longevity as a closer. He came back in 2010 and was he had a 143 ERA and retired as a 38-year-old. It's just insanity to me that, we're having even a discussion on Billy Wagner. He feels like a lock, like a top 5 relief pitcher all time.
In 15 seasons, Billy Wagner had an ERA over 3 one time.
Jesus Christ. And that was only in 28 games. He got hurt in 2000. Yeah.
Exactly. That was in that one where he had a 6.18. Every other year besides that, his highest ERA was 2.85.
We talk about relief pitchers a lot because of the contract negotiations and stuff, and relief pitchers are so common in getting contracts. One thing we always talk about is how volatile relief pitching is.
Yeah.
Billy Wagner was not volatile. He was a lock for a sub 3 ERA and a ton of strikeouts. At least a strikeout an inning, if not more, every single year he played. And that's he doesn't get any credit for that. And it just stinks, man.
No, it does. So before we jump to the 2023 ballot, I know we've kind of just went about talking who got in and how stupid it is. But let's let David run through his ballot of who, obviously we don't get an actual vote, but we make our mock ballots here. Mine and David's ballot are identical here, so I'll let him run through it and just know that's my exact same ballot and reasonings.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll lead off. We both had Scott Rowland, obviously. We've talked about Todd Helton. We've talked about Billy Wagner. We've talked about Jeff Kent. All 4 of those guys were in. I've got Andrew Jones in, and I'll do a little bit on him. Andrew Jones, best defensive center fielder of all time to this point, and by the numbers, and then he has 400 plus homers, which to me just it doesn't matter. Like it genuinely doesn't matter to me how long he played, because that's what a lot of the citing that is not voting for Andrew Jones is seeing, is that, oh well, he fell off after age 30 and he didn't really play as many years as Scott Rowland or some of these other guys. I do not care. He has the counting stats, he has the reputation, he's got the WAR. Put him in.
67 career WAR.
67 career WAR. It doesn't matter how long he played. He accumulated that much WAR, which is insane. I've got Bobby Abreu in because Bobby Abreu's career feels a lot like Vladimir Guerrero Jr.'s, and we just elected Vladimir Guerrero Jr. I didn't have Bobby Abreu in when we had those other guys on the ballot, but because Vlad was so unanimous, I feel like you have to put Bobby Abreu in. He's a very similar player, very similar production. It just makes sense. Not to mention, he's really good, right? On base percentage, we laud it. Bobby Abreu is a master at getting on base, and he has a ton of stolen bases. We don't really, value the stolen base very much. Bobby Abreu is a really good guy at getting stolen bases. I've got Carlos Beltran in despite the last season, but one of the arguments that I've tended to make in these Hall of Fame arguments is if you remove the part that is questionable, right? For Carlos Beltran, it's that last season with Houston. Is he still a Hall of Famer? For Carlos Beltran, it's absolutely. That's a guy with 70 career WAR who has gone to the postseason and been a postseason MVP multiple times. He's just a masterful hitter. He went from being a defensive-minded center fielder to a power hitting DH at the end of his career. Beltran's an easy one, but the reputation is tarnished because of that late thing. I think eventually he'll get in, but for now, it's too fresh in their minds, the voters' minds. So I have Gary Sheffield.
He still almost got 50% of the votes.
Right. I think his path is there because he's better. Like, I think the voters are just going to cut off the last couple of seasons for him, and then just that's it, because we know you were ring chasing, and then would you still be a Hall of Famer without 2017? I would say yes. So if enough voters figure that, then it'll come true. Gary Sheffield, I have being in the Hall of Fame. He's coming up on his 10th year on the ballot, which means he'll be off. Gary is one of the guys who was suspected for using steroids in the 90s, but this is a guy who has very similar numbers to Sammy Sosa, Fred McGriff, Mark McGwire, a lot of those the big home run hitters from the 90s and early 2000s. Gary, though, was able to do it while playing infield defense as well, which gives me just a little bit of an edge on him. But I was voting for Sammy last year as well. I just think these steroid guys are all members of the same club that are just never going to get in with this committee. And it's frustrating because David Ortiz has the same level of involvement in the steroid era as Gary Sheffield. He was on one report. And David Ortiz waltzed into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, and that's part of my argument of the whole, why are we using one criteria against somebody and not against everybody? And the old school voters who are very anti, like, steroid era type people, where you see the more younger voters like, hey, it was a part of the game. We all understand it. It was happening. Like, we still need to acknowledge that era of the game happened, and these were the best players during that era. And Sheffield definitely gets hurt in that era.
Right. And for Sheffield's time, he was never suspended for steroids after steroids became illegal. And he was only implicated one time, which is just, it does in fact beat out these last two. And for my last two spots, I mean, that's how I fill out the ballot, was those guys went on first. My last two spots, I was between Mark Burley, Torrey Hunter, K-Rod, Francisco Rodriguez, Jimmy Rollins, Manny Ramirez, and Alex Rodriguez. Those were my 6 for the last two spots. And I chose the 2 guys who have been suspended for PED use, which is Manny Ramirez and Alex Rodriguez. But I chose them because their numbers are indicative of the time that baseball had in those early 2000s. I cannot think of my childhood without, growing up watching baseball, playing baseball video games, without collecting baseball cards without thinking of Manny Ramirez and Alex Rodriguez. Those were two of the guys that I would always draft in my fantasy drafts on like MLB The Show 2005. I would, those are the guys that I was always, rooting for in the playoffs for big moments. A-Rod was the type of guy that you always kind of wanted to be because he was signing those huge contracts, and then he ended up wherever he wanted to go. He signed a huge 10-year deal with the Rangers and then turns around and goes to the Yankees anyway. And it's just, it was just Manny was an antic guy. He was a fun guy to watch in the field. It's just we know the way it turned out, which is those guys were both suspended for PED use after their prime, long after their biggest impacts on baseball were recorded. Although in Manny's case, it was his biggest impact to me in baseball was the Dodgers beating the Cubs in the 2008 NLDS. Manny went berserk in that series, and it doesn't really matter anymore, but he was definitely probably on something. But it's like, if we can find those, I'm going to find the numbers for that. But those two are in for me, and it is close. But ultimately, I prefer to honor them with the Hall of Fame at this point.
And I said it on last year's Hall of Fame episode when Matt and I did it. One way I look at voting is, throughout my eyes at least, can I tell the game about the era without saying these guys' names, right? Mm. And if you're talking about that, late 90s into the 2000s era right there, you start the conversation with Alex Rodriguez and Manny Ramirez. Mm-hmm. Like they are two of the biggest names here. And one thing that it's kind of mind-boggling, if you say 70 win player, 70 WAR player, that should be a surefire Hall of Famer, right? Right around there is what people are says the number. If you look at Alex Rodriguez's career WAR, it's 113.7. So let's round up to 114, right? If you take the average 70 WAR for a Hall of Fame player away, he still has 44 career WAR there. Would you want to guess what person on this ballot who we just said Hall of Very Good has less career WAR than that or right around the same career WAR?
Was it Torrey Hunter or Jimmy Rollins?
Torrey Hunter has 43 career WAR.
Yeah, those guys.
I don't care about the PEDs here. That with Alex Rodriguez, because he's no doubt a Hall of Famer regardless.
Right.
If you can take the average Hall of Fame WAR number there, subtract it, and still have a guy who should be Hall of Very Good.
Right.
There's no way that the steroid part of him in the later part of his career added that much of the value there.
Right. You can take away an entire player on this ballot away from the stats of Alex Rodriguez and put him into the Hall of Fame anyway as 70.
Exactly.
Like and here's just some stats for Manny, and I'll also add some stats for A-Rod. Manny Ramirez has the last 165 RBI season, and I think he's got the biggest RBI season since like 1930 by anybody. RBI obviously just a fluky stat, but Manny Ramirez playing on that 1999 Cleveland offense with Jim Tomei and some of those other guys that are, I think, also Hall of Famers: Kenny Lofton, Roberto Alomar, Omar Vizquel, David Justice. He ends up with 165 RBIs that season. That's the most since 1930. So that's a massive stat. And then also he has a 500 on batting average he had a 500 batting average in the 2008 playoffs with the Dodgers. 520, 667. 1,080 as a 36-year-old when he pretty much single-handedly eliminated the Cubs from playoff contention. So, this is a guy who was really good for a really long time. Even though he was not a defensive-minded player, he was a guy who could get up into the 180 WRC plus and was routinely a 30 to 40 home run hitter and won a World Series with Boston. Took Boston obviously to break the curse. So, he's the kind of guy view as a Hall of Famer, and I kind of always have. And then A-Rod is a very similar way. I think he was the first rookie player to have. He had like a Troutian rookie season at age 20. I think it was his first rookie season. He had the most extra base hits of any 20-year-old of all time in his first season, 1996, as a 20-year-old.
Yeah,
and then
both of those. I mean, absolutely.
Yeah.
It mind boggles me that people. I mean, I understand the steroid argument there, but it's just boggling that they don't have, more than 40% of the vote. I mean, either one of them, they're at 35 and 37 on this ballot. Like, it's mind boggling. But anyways, before we wrap it up, let's look forward towards the 2024 ballot, which sees probably another handful of, Hall of Famers in our eyes adding to this ballot.
Yeah, let's look. So the only guy who fell off was Jeff Kent among guys who have the 10th year. And then the guys who were 5%ed off was every single first time vote getter, except for Francisco Rodriguez and Carlos Beltran. So there will be a lot of spaces to add more guys. And the first, and probably, I would say, Hall of Fame lock is Adrian Beltre. And this is exciting because getting to talk about Adrian Beltre is fantastic. He was fun to watch his whole career. And this is a dude who played for a long time. And, you just elected Scott Rowland. So, I mean, Adrian Beltre is kind of inarguably a better player than Scott Rowland in total. Yeah. But, he was around forever. And that's a dude who was extremely talented, great defender at third base, was able to play it his whole career, and went to the World Series a few times, but didn't actually win it. He was always good in the playoffs. I love Adrian Beltre.
Still not over the Dodgers trading him in 2005.
Right. And he went to the Mariners after that too. And he kind of revitalized his career in Texas. I think of Texas Adrian Beltre, but he hit 48 homers in 2004.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Second guy that you're going to know, Joe Mauer, getting Hall of Fame votes next year. And I think you're going to have to elect Mauer. Because eventually Yadier Molina is going to be on this ballot, and they're going to elect him first ballot. If Joe Mauer doesn't get elected first ballot, and then Yadier Molina does, I'm going to be very angry. I'll be angry when Molina gets elected anyway, but I'll be like, I get it. I'll be less angry if Mauer gets in right now, because you're telling me elite catching is good. Joe Mauer was an elite catcher, although he didn't play as long as Yadier Molina.
Yeah, Joe Mauer is by far one of my favorite players of all time. And I mean, I have a little bit of bias, but the way that he was able to play the catcher position for so long, and even he dealt with some concussions later on in his career.
Yeah, he got injured out. He could have gotten a little bit more.
Yeah.
He probably could have gotten to 60 WAR. It's just...
Yeah, I mean, he did concussions, and he had to play a little bit of first base for most of his last couple seasons even. Mm-hmm. But yeah, he at 100% should be in my eyes, but that is a lot of biasy as well.
He's one of the final players, I think, that's going to enter the Hall of Fame ballot with a 300 batting average. I don't think you're going to see very many guys getting here with a 300 batting average anymore. I think Pujols fell below. Well, he might have gotten back above. But then you're also going to, Trout's not at 300 batting average.
Pujols is below. He's 296.
Right, yeah. So I was trying to think of other guys who might have 300 batting average, but it's very rare at this point to have a 300 batting average, and Mauer was at 306.
Yeah.
Also adding to the ballot, Chase Utley. He'll be a very interesting case, I think, because he's got the WAR. He's probably got the pedigree as well, but does he have the impact is my question. He's going to have it based on his defensive value at second base, but then you just didn't elect Jeff Kent, who was a better second baseman than Chase Utley in terms of offense, but he obviously wasn't as good defensively. So what, you're telling us you needed to be really well-rounded second baseman? That's going to be a bit confusing.
And another thing that is sort of kind of a comparison between Utley and Kent as well is Utley was very brash with the media, which you got to remember, these are writers at the end of the day who decide the fate here. He was very brash there, but for what it's worth is he does have more WAR than Jeff Kent. He's at 61.6. which that's been a big argument the last few years.
More WAR, but fewer
number.
homers, and Utley is only a 117 OPS plus, WRC plus type of guy. So, but a lot of that comes from his down, his down last few years. And again, this is where I do wonder, why are we so insistent on promoting longevity when obviously when a lot of these guys fall off late in their careers? Give me your peak. Let me see what your peak is, right? Let's see what your best years have. Chase Utley's best years, he was, the best second baseman in baseball. So he's definitely
2007 season.
He's definitely a very good candidate, I think, next season, a good one that'll be talked about because you'll be lumping him in there with Todd Helton, and he's obviously going to. I think he'll be higher up on people's minds than Jimmy Rollins. So, in terms of middle infield, David Wright is also going to be eligible next year, and talk about a career that I think Wright, if Wright had been able to play like 3 more full seasons, maybe even just 2 more full seasons, he'd be in. But as it stands, I think Wright will not. He won't get in next year. I don't even know if he'll get 5% of the votes.
Yeah,
because the it's been so long since people saw a really good David Wright.
Yeah, and the matter that's going to hurt him too is that the ballot's going to have so many people on it that he'll get a couple courtesy votes probably, but it's very hard to see, with as many people on that ballot that should be getting the votes, to have him above the 5% threshold, let alone, he's going to stay on the ballot with a lot of these people for a lot of the time, being able to ever get to that Hall of Fame mark, without the longevity, without the counting stats because of that. And just the overall, look at the WAR, who's just about 51, or is 51.2. It's going to be very hard to see him have the case, even though, like you mentioned, that peak of David Wright, those 4 or 5 years between 2005, basically through 2010, and was just very elite level.
Yeah, he was awesome.
Yeah.
Also on the ballot next year will be Bartolo Colon, who won a Cy Young, I think 2002 or 2005, one of those. But he pitched forever, and he'll have that longevity case. But I honestly don't think there's any way you can elect Bartolo to the Hall of Fame. Hall of very good, sure, but he didn't have that impact that you want to see out of some of these Hall of Fame guys. But everybody loves Bartolo, so he'll definitely get some votes.
He 100% should be in just for hitting the homer off James Shields.
Yep, he's got the homer.
The greatest Bartolo Colon memory of all time.
He would likely be the worst hitting Hall of Famer in the Hall of Fame, like all pitchers included.
Yeah. His whole case is the longevity because, if you look at the counting stats, 51 career WAR, a 4.12 ERA, a 4.15 FIP, he's revered for being big, sexy, for, the longevity, for being the guy who kind of later on in his career became more of a meme player than anything, than being good, actually. But yeah, it's going to be very, very hard to see him even having a legitimate case. He'll probably be 5% off, to be honest.
Yeah. You'll look at Mark Burley struggling to stay on, Andy Pettit struggling to stay on. I think both of those guys were more impactful pitchers with better longevity cases than Bartolo. I think Bartolo is also one of the guys who's on a steroid list. And then he's also not, we joke about him having like a second family or something. I don't think he's a great guy off the field either. But again, it's all about reputation in the media, and Bartolo has that going for him. So,
he's
other
gonna
guys
get in for that. Utley and Kent aren't.
Right. Other guys on here, Matt Holliday, son just got drafted first overall. Holliday will now be on the Hall of Fame ballot. Good player for the Cardinals and Rockies. DH. Matt Holliday's offensive stats are there, but I don't know that his overall reputation is good enough to get him through. He's a guy who hit better than you remember, but he was a DH for the whole second half of his career. So the WAR numbers will never be there, but he was a better hitter than Scott Rowland, for example.
Yeah. And people are going to penalize his Coors Field numbers against him. And if we're having Todd Helton struggle, even though when you really think about it, he played more years outside of Coors than he did in Coors, which is really mind-boggling to think about, because I just remember Matt Holliday terrorizing the Dodgers on the Rockies every single year.
Yeah.
but he played more years in St. Louis than he did in Colorado.
God, I hated Matt Holliday.
Yeah. I mean, it's really mind-boggling. He's one of those that kind of just fall into the Hall of Very Good argument.
Right. I do feel like Holliday's a Hall of Very Good guy, but you could talk me into putting Holliday in the Hall of Fame. He's one of those last great contact and power hitters, where we're seeing more guys who hit for power never really have that contact capability that Holliday had. Just a couple more names here before we sign off. Adrian Gonzalez, Dodgers legend. He really fell off, though, once he had gotten to the Dodgers. He was probably on a Hall of Fame trajectory when he was in San Diego, but after he went to the Red Sox, man, I just feel like he was never the same. This is a guy who's got lesser numbers than than Todd Helton across the board. If Todd Helton's struggling, I think Adrian Gonzalez will be 5% off.
Oh, he will be probably. 36 career WAR. He was probably, if you remember Adrian Gonzalez, you probably think he's better than what the numbers say. 287 average, over 300 career homers. I remembered him more as a better defensive first baseman than what the numbers say.
First base it penalizes.
Yeah.
WAR is a bad ranking for guys like Matt Holliday, Adrian Gonzalez, and the next guy we're going to talk about. It just doesn't work for them.
Yeah.
We just need to look at their impact. Adrian Gonzalez definitely had that impact early in his career, but later on he felt like a kind of a thing that was slowing the Dodgers down, coming down to the end of his career, like especially when I think about like the 2016 NLCS. Adrian Gonzalez got thrown out at the plate at one point in that series, and it's like anybody else with a little more athleticism might get that run across, and it might change the dynamic of that series. So, that's just how I remember Adrian Gonzalez, but I do remember those Padres years where he was hitting 40 homers in pitcher-friendly Petco where Jake Peavy was going off. So, had he played anywhere else, he might be at 350 homers, and then we're talking about something else. So,
Lastly,
the last name I'll call, I'll give you the rundown after, but Jose Bautista is going to be on the ballot next year too, and I'm a big fan of Jose Bautista. He's going to get 5% off, but man, his peak numbers were higher than his career WAR, which it tells you everything about Jose Bautista. He's got a great story. He came from, being bounced around, missing a bunch of teams to, being an MVP level player. I think he might have won MVP actually.
2010, I think, right?
Nope, he didn't win it either year, but he was a 6-time All-Star. You can't tell the story of the early 2010s without him. He was hitting 50 homers and making those huge swing changes and kind of changing the way you approach slugging in your mid-20s. But every other year around his prime, he was just completely miserable as a player. And it's disappointing because if he had played his entire career like he played his prime, this is a surefire, no doubt Hall of Famer. But as it is, this is a peak performance guy, kind of reminds me of Corey Kluber in that he's got a peak that is just so memorable, but he doesn't have any longevity around it. He doesn't have any performance around it. It's very difficult to build a case for him. But man, that peak was fun.
It was a lot of fun to watch when he was hitting tanks and Roger Center with him and Edwin Encarnacion back to back.
Yeah. He's got the most famous home run of all time too.
And it's the whole thing behind our logo. I mean,
right.
The Jose Bautista bat flip throw right there, that is the basis of our logo for this show. So we will always remember Jose Bautista for sure.
Yep. We'll be we'll be rooting him on for sure. I do hope he gets in. He won't, right? But
he's not.
I will be cheering for him for sure.
I just hope he doesn't get 5% off the first year.
Right. Let's at least talk about him,
Very much.
But how are you going to not 5% off Jose Bautista when you 5% it off Jim Edmonds, Kenny Lofton, Johan Santana, like guys with better peaks and with better longevity than Jose. Also, that will be on the ballot: Jose Reyes, Victor Martinez, James Shields, Brandon Phillips, maybe some other guys that might get recognized like Ryan Madsen or Jim Johnson, but really it's just those couple of guys. So I think next year should be entertaining because I think we will once again have more than 10 Hall of Fame caliber players for just the 10 spots. And then we'll see baseball writers voting for nobody. Can't wait.
Yeah, I mean, what we're going to have only 2 people that are probably worthy Hall of Famers being off this ballot. I mean, obviously with Roland getting in and Kent falling off. I mean, and then you're adding what I said, another handful of names. So I swear when I see blank ballots next year, I'm going to lose it.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta. These are Hall of Fame players. I think we've got a good opportunity maybe to get Helton and Wagner in. Really cheering for Wagner.
Yeah.
And then obviously Beltran and Mauer. I mean, they could elect 4 guys next year. I think there's an outside shot at that.
Elect 10 challenge.
They should.
It's not going to happen. But, we went a lot longer than what we were talking about beforehand. But I think it was some good Hall of Fame talk here. We will be back, I believe, next week with the full-on, our actual rundown of actual moves. And we might get a little bit of Matt's feelings on the Hall of Fame voting and what it looked like from there. But before we finally sign off on anything else you want to wrap up on, David?
Nope. I'm good.
All right.
We'll see you guys next week.
Yep. I'm going to end it with Hall of Fame voting is stupid.